Achim and Gerrit from Litex Publishing in Germany, and they're going to talk to you about the interoperability of XProc pipelines.
Yeah, the project is about porting a real-life pipeline, the one we used at XML Prague in our tutorial, to Morgana. And our interest in that is, as Norm is not here, we want to eliminate a bit the dependency on Norman Walsh fixing bugs in Calabash or improving error messages. And so we've been very keen to explore whether our pipelines that utilize many Calabash extensions will also run on Morgana. So I hand over to Achim.
Just a quick survey. How many of you got this joke? Okay, so a lot of people using actually XProc who'd never heard of XProc. Okay, who's using it every day, every week? Oh, okay. And who've tried to use it? And who failed to use it? Okay, I guess. Okay, so it's the background of our project, as Gerrit said, is a joint project between Litex Publishing Services and XML project. The task was to take a complex pipeline system from one XProc processor to the other. So we had to start the processor the system was developed for, and we have to take it to my processor. And we try to see what happens when you do this. This is an interesting task, but it gets a little more complicated as always. We have to keep the pipelines runnable on both processors. So the idea was the pipeline being able to run on both processors. We could not change the pipelines, so they are not able to run on the other processor. And the pipelines have to be, we have to ensure maintainability, so we could not do any hacks on it, so the pipeline authors could not work with the pipeline again. This was an interesting task, and we thought it might shed some light on XProc as a technology, and especially on something we call XProc's interoperability. We see it as a test case for interoperability. I know the term interoperability is not right there, but we chose it just to mark the question, is it possible to run the same real-world pipelines on two processors and get the same answer, get the same result? Interoperability, or to prove interoperable specifications, is part of the W3C standarding process. The pipeline, the authors are, Michael, help me, requested to show interoperability for each feature. Two interoperable implementations for each feature. So it's tested by the W3C process. XProc is a W3C recommendation, but first of all, real-world pipelines are far more complex than the test suite use cases. The test suite use cases are typically 10 to 12, 20 lines of code. Real-world pipelines are much bigger. And second point is the test cases are designed for test. Real-world pipelines are designed to solve problems. So the pipeline authors will use every feature offered by the processor, standard or not. And third, for a long time there was only one processor you could use for real-world problems. It was the only serious choice, XML Calabash. So even if you wanted to design an interoperable pipeline, you could not check it because there was just one processor. Who should care about interoperability? Or who cares about interoperability? Or should? For pipeline users, it means freedom of choice. If you have a pipeline system you like, and if XProc is an interoperable technology, you can also take the processor you like. You're not stuck into the processor the pipeline system was designed for. For pipeline authors, it's a question of amount of time you need. if we have interoperability, we can have something like write once, use everywhere. Write for one processor, use it on all processors, on more than one processor. We think that it's also important for technology decision makers, people deciding to use XProc or not to use XProc, because when we have interoperability, there's obviously no vendor lock-in, and it may be an aspect of protection of investment. If one processor goes down, you have the other to use it. And so for the community, might be an approval of the work done. It might get some hints what works to do. So we think our project is also interesting in a broader perspective. And to show you the broader perspective, we prepared this slide. We have a complex XProc pipeline system designed for processor A, and we have to take it to processor B. And we wonder whether it will work. In fact, the real pipeline system is Transpect, and we take it from XML Calabash to my processor, where just the icon went up.
Maybe you haven't committed to
yes, my problem, always my problem, I know. Okay, but there's an icon
I can
also.
use the local slides, but I think everybody will...
yes, we'll show it in probably in a minute. Okay, so this is the task to do, and we want to give you an impression of the task to do just by talking about the top half, about Transpect, how complex is the pipeline system, and then go to the lower part, just a short talk about Calabash and Morgana XProc, and then obviously the main part of the talk will be the transition process. Gerrit.
Yes, in Prague this year we had a tutorial on how to set up a Transpect pipeline. The example was going from a Word manuscript via JUT's XML to EPUB. This is also on GitHub. You can use it to learn how to set up complex XProc pipelining systems that use a lot of XML Calabash extensions. It uses 76 distinct XProc steps, some standard steps with the P namespace prefix, and some extension steps from the XProc initiative. Some Calabash extensions, namely CX-eval for dynamically evaluating pipelines, and a CX message, which is a bit more trivial just to emit a message. And then 39 steps from Transpect libraries. 3 of them are facade steps for extension steps we did ourselves that are implemented in Java. And 2 are project specific. It's a front-end pipeline for invoking the conversion, and 1 intermediate dynamically loaded and evaluated pipeline. This is, those of you who have been here 2 years ago, this is what I demoed at the Demo Jam at XML London 2 years ago. I demoed that with limited success, so at that stage I already thought that people are not so much into XProc development, but this is a nice feature of XProc, that you can sprinkle P documentation within your pipelines and then have an XProc pipeline here called Transpect doc run on your pipeline system, and it will document everything and render the embedded documentation. So, and here you have the statistics of which steps, which namespace prefix was used. So Transpect is a collection of libraries that convert from XML-based formats to other XML-based formats. It's a huge collection of functionality that has accumulated over the years. We open sourced that whole library 3 years ago in Prague, and it has been adopted by many publishers and standardization organizations. A good selling point has been that it's open source. What makes it a bit complex to adopt is the inherent complexity of XProc and its additional features that are a bit unwieldy. We'll get into that in a minute. So it's based on XProc, on XSLT2, on relaxing for validations, and also, of course, on schematron. The methodology, and this is where CX eval, the dynamic evaluation, comes in. It's a configuration cascade. We'll look into that in a minute. A basic concept is HTML reports where you aggregate the errors of different conversion steps and render them in an HTML rendering of your input documents at the approximate location where the error was located. So it's meant for end users who don't read very technical reports. They get a familiar rendering of their input and see the errors, hopefully with instructions on how to act upon them. Another part of the transpect concept is that we use a similar thing like what is not Florent Georges' project where you import things by
XPath packaging system.
XPath package system. So we just use a similar system of canonical URIs where you import your XSLT or even your fonts for the EPUB. You can use abstract or canonical URIs for these things, and they will be mapped to local files via XML catalog. And this proved as a kind of a migration hurdle because Morgana thus far didn't support XML catalog. So this is one of the learnings that we had on the things that Achim needed to implement. This is a typical directory structure of a transpect project. It's from that demo project. What's in green is it's just the modules, and in blue it's A9S. It's for adaptations where you add your custom code, and you have this layout approach. So the first level of customization is common, and then you have a configurable cascade on where you can load XSLT that will import the more general XSLT, or where you can add specific CSS for a certain journal that should look a bit different than the other journals. So it's a configuration cascade. And the cascade is not limited to XSLT, but you can also give implementations of, well, you have the macroscopic pipeline that has major steps from going from Word to an intermediate XML, from there to JUTS XML, from there to EPUB, and also from JUTS to HTML for the error report rendering, and then you have the validation step. And these are the macroscopic steps. And in the course of the conversion, you can also do some specific things for these macroscopic steps. For example, if you have after you created that intermediate XML format from Word, it's essentially a flat docbook, you apply some kind of hierarchization. So we typically use Word style names for detecting headings and nesting these headings. And there you have a choice. You can, in one pipeline, you can, so lists are sometimes flat paragraphs too, and it's very tricky to infer the correct list numbering and nesting from what you see in the docx format. And so you have the choice. For one pipeline, you could use the heuristic list nester that is based on indentation, and for another pipeline you can use another list nester that relies on style names. So this is just to illustrate that you can add additional functionality for certain configuration items, for journals, for example. In XProc, you typically, if you have different settings, if you have different XProc pipelines, you need to run a completely different pipeline. And we try to keep the overall pipeline the same and just to load the specific things for the detailed steps. And CX eval was a means to that aim. So we use it heavily to load dynamically XPL files that implement just a tiny conversion step, and this will be loaded dynamically. And in order to avoid redundancy, we can even generate the XPL by XSLT. We do it often, so we use a general pipeline and then we just transform it to have the specific one. And this was a challenge for Morgana, the dynamic evaluation, and also the HTML reporting. This is just an example for the reporting. We have extension steps for determining image resolution. So we can analyze the images, and this is done by a Calabash extension that wraps some Java 2D libraries and outputs an XML representation of the image sizes, and then we invoke this check here on the cover. This is taken from the Calabash configuration. This is from the pipeline, and this is the output. And we have here the 219 pixels, and this is what is then rendered here in the HTML report. So we can aggregate information from different steps, including some extensions. Another extension gives you XPath locations for relaxing messages, so that you can, in the absence of line numbers, you have documents flowing through the steps. They are not serialized in between. You don't have proper line numbers, so you can just emit the XPath location for an relaxing error and also use it to render it into your HTML rendering. So these are just to illustrate some of the extensions that Calabash provides that we use, and some extensions that we added ourselves. So these are essentially the extensions that we rely on, and the challenge was to also make them available in Morgana, and this is where Achim will take over again.
Okay, there's the top part. Now, just this short slide with the lower part, and probably, no, the icon is gone again. XML Calabash, I guess all of you, those who work with XML, with XProc, work with Calabash. So it's developed by Norm Walsh, who's also the chair of the W3C working group. Morgana XProc is developed by my company, German startup. Calabash is available since 2008. Remember, XProc is from 2010, so it's even older than XProc. It was one of the reference implementations for the W3C recommendation. Morgana is available since early 2014, so 2 years. Recent version, release number 18, I'm on release number 11. Test suite score, obviously 100%. Every feature tested in the test suite is covered by Calabash. To correct Charles, I'm just 99.67, not 100%, because there are 3 tests in the test pipeline, testing optional features not supported by Morgana. They're connected to XML 1.1, and XML 1.1 is not supported by Morgana. Just the highlights, very long history, built on top of Saxon, very reliable. Highlight of my processor is some pluggability. You can choose the X-query machine you like, you can choose the XSLT machine you like. There's some built-in, there's an adaptive system for others. You can adapt your file system. There's a graphical user interface. I thought it made it easier for people to learn XProc with a graphical user interface and not also to learn the command line shell commands. The license is the same for both systems, both GPL 2.0. The status, of course, Calabash is gold standard. If you talk about XProc, you talk about Calabash, and if you talk about Morgana XProc, well, maybe the new kid on the block. Hopefully it's a new kid on the block. So we saw there's a very complex pipeline system. I think it's a legitimate testing case. What happened, or what was to expect? What happened? If you ever looked at an W233 recommendation, you know that there can be compliant systems not doing the same. Because there's always, or in most complex recommendations, there is a distinction between necessary and optional features implemented in the XProc specs. There are 74 items which are optional. The processor can implement it, it has to implement it in a special way, but it's not required to implement it. There are 21 implementation defined features. You can XProc has an open step pipeline, and the phrase they use in the recommendation is the processor has to know how to run the step, full stop. So there is some divergency in this. There are only sketched extension steps in the XProc community. There's a step signature and some 4 or 5 lines of text, but not well documented. And of course, because XProc uses XQuery, XSLT, Schematron, and so on, when you build on top of these technologies, you might get problems from the underlying technologies. This is what we get, what we thought. From a theoretical perspective, we did a long sketch in the long talk in a paper. If you want to know the details, what did we expect for our project? When we first met, what were my expectations? Well, the first one was what Gerrit just said, was resource management. It has nothing to do with XProc as a technology, but with real-world projects. You typically do not have one file, but you have a bunch of files. You have an XProc pipeline importing a library, you have an XSLT style sheet running in another file, and you have to weave them together. And there are 2 systems to weave them together. XML catalog, the one which is used by Transpect, and the other one is the XPath packaging system. And the problem was they use the one system and I support the other. One could overcome this, but probably not. There are user-written extensions steps in a secondary language. There are three Java steps. Four Java steps, especially written for Calabash. It's obviously difficult to take them to another system. There are differences in the supported library, step libraries. CX message is a Calabash extension step. CX eval, or as I say, evil, is a step supported just by Calabash. And there's some problem with the use of the extension attribute. Depends on, I think I will skip this for timing reasons, but depends on says this step has to run. No, this step has to finish after this step finishes. And this is quite useful for real-world scenarios, but it's not in the specs. It's developed later by Norm Walsh. And it's also supported by MySys, but it's obviously not a standard. So I skipped this. This was what the one expected. Expectation, one thing. Reality, one thing. What did we found? What we found is, first of all, there's no standard way to import pipeline systems in XProc. The specification says, give a URI, and the processor has to answer to this URI. How? And sometimes it's a file on a local file system on the internet. Sometimes it's a special trigger in the system. So if you give Morgana as URI, it will make visible some steps without loading anything. Calabash does the same, but not the same with the same URIs, obviously, or sadly. So this was one problem. The second problem we found is there's some under-determination in the standards. There are stats like xstore and so on, who are supposed to store XML documents, and the specification says you have to raise an error if this is not possible. What does it mean? If you have a file, for example, and there's a path, is it possible to store if the upper directory does not exist? It's not specified, and Norm and me took different answers. Norm said, yes, it's possible, I will create this path, and I'm strict, say, no, it's not possible. You have first to create the directory, and then you can store into the directory. We have different interpretations of the specs. One is with XSLT. The main question is, does there have to be a primary result document? If you're familiar with XSLT2, there is not always a primary result document in your XSLT style sheets. The spec says you have to have one. Norm is more relaxing than me, so he allows you not to have one. My system will always complain if there's one. This is something to fix in the future, I think. Trying to get a non-existent file is different behavior. Trying to create an existing folder with mkdir is also different behavior. If the folder exists, I will throw an arrow and say, no, it's not possible to create this. Norm says, okay, what you want is, you want the directory there, okay. So these are the main problems. And something we got is with those types of namespaces, they're accepted by Saxon, by the X9 APs. They're not accepted by the document model I use. I use Xum as a document model in Java, and the scheme is missing. And he says, he will not build a document with a missing scheme. So this are the real world problems. Just to line up the problems we talked about, resource management, interpretation, what are the solutions? Well, the first solution with resource management was to give in. I wrote an XML catalog resolver for my system. So we do not have to change something. I also give in here. I adapted the behavior from Morgana XProc to XML. So when you store and the directory is not there, now the directory is created. They're user-defined steps in a second language. In Java, we have to rewrite them from Morgana. XProc, we come up with a system which makes this rewriting process better, shorter, but this is a theme probably a theme for another talk. These two types of property you have to change by hand. And then we have this for probably significant messages, different XProc library import mechanisms, and we come up with a, we think, clever solution because we use XProc to solve these problems. Actually, we have two XProc pipelines. The basic idea is to use XProc pipelines, and actually we have two. One, you have to import for every interoperable project. So if you want the pipeline to run on Calabash and Morgana, you have to import them. Don't worry, just 3 steps. And the second one, you have to run just once to change all the things which are specific to Morgana, or to change things that are specific to Calabash. And you got an interoperable pipeline which is also manageable for users. So I think I'll skip this. What's important? No, skip this. Skip. Just this is what the second pipeline does, and it's also always runs just once on your system, and then you got it interoperable. The pipeline system is publicly available on GitHub, so you can use it for your projects when you want to move from, at the moment it's the move from Morgana, from Calabash to Morgana, but I will add the other way around, so if you try out Morgana and you don't like it and want back to Calabash, you get the pipeline back. Makes your XProc project interoperable. We think it's always also a documentation feature, because if you look at the pipelines, you see where the specs or the state of interoperability is close. The pipeline is about 100, 150 lines. Remember, XProc is very verbose. And it's available today. Last thing, what the lessons learned. Gerrit?
Oh, it's my task. I didn't learn a thing.
Okay. Okay, so for pipeline users, if you want to have interoperable pipelines, yes, you can move from one processor to the other without knowing anything about XProc, just use of pipelines. For pipeline authors, the answer is the same. KISS, this time it reads, keep it standard stupid, but you can't do it always. So mind the obstacles we discussed, look in the paper, look into pipelines we developed. There you can see the problems for interoperable pipelines. For technology decision makers, don't worry about vendor logins. XProc is a great tool. And for the community, if you look at what Gerrit showed you, surprisingly less to do to move from one processor to the other. So the working group really did a great job to make interoperable pipelines. But we need the two pipelines, and as long as we need the two pipelines, XProc is not an interoperable tool in the full sense. So for the community, we have something to do to make XProc a fully useful and interoperable language. Thank you very much.
I think we have time for 2 questions. Don't be shy.
Coffee is a thing.
So something I always wondered about XProc, which seems a good fit, is for sub-pipelines, you should be able to exploit some parallelism in the machine.
In my machine?
Well, in a machine that has parallel processing. Do you have anything in Morgana that sort of farms off sub-pipelines to different processes?
No. No. I think it's very difficult with XProc 1.0 to farm it out. XProc 2.0 might be a way to say this can run in parallel. Please do it if you can.
Okay. Thank you.
So for V2, are there any specific features you really miss because of what you learned with this?
We have to have depends on is a failure in yes, a failure of the recommendation process not to have this attribute.
Yeah.
You need it all the time. If you work with file systems and so on, you need it all the time. Not from this. This was a typical 1.0 project. There are some things we always want. Attribute template, text value templates, but this is not XProc 2.0. XProc 2.0 goes in a completely different direction.
But what is also desirable is to get rid of these Java-written extension steps. So
Yes.
a better deal with binary data and have some natural steps that will transform images or read their dimensions. And this is because XProc 1.0 is very much XML focused. This has been a bit of an omission, and also there are some Calabash-specific serialization options for binary data. These are also not standardized. So, but this has been tackled in the 2.0 requirements.
perhaps one addition. What I've learned is we should take the steps defined in XProc org to XProc. They are useful, you need them all the time, so make them standard. One last thing for people failing to use XProc. Try it again, it's worth it. Thank you.